Greetings, I'm Matt Field, your favorite write-in candidate for governor. Probably trying to put as much content out there as possible, being basically a one-man band for the most part. But I believe that it is what I'm supposed to do. So I am, again, I'm a write-in candidate for governor. I'm Matt Field. And basically, I use this podcast, which is entitled Morality Over Monarchy, to reference back to my book / proposal to Utahns about how we reconstruct the government in many ways to ensure that we can avoid corruption, that we can protect our kids, that we can ensure that morality is the centerpiece of our entire existence in terms of what government does. Unfortunately, the situation we find ourselves in is that we have generations and generations of people that have become accustomed to the government coming in and saying, hey, I can provide this social program, I can provide this social safety net, or we can do this, we can do that. And as a result of convenience, essentially, we have allowed it to happen, which is unfortunate. We should not be allowing the government to take over those things that we should be in charge of. Much like when you have a kid leave the house, right? The kid is super excited to leave. They're so excited for all this freedom, for all this liberty to choose and do exactly what they want to do. But then the rent bill comes in, and the electrical bill comes in, and the food bill is there, and they have to pay for gas, and they have to pay for insurance, and then all these different things come tumbling down onto their head, and they say, I don't want to do this. When in all reality, I mean, if you want liberty, if you want freedom, then you have to be willing to take on that responsibility. And the problem is that we have allowed mama and dada to continue to pay our bills while we pretend to be free, when in all reality we are not. And throughout my book, what you can access for free, 100% free at govmat.org, you can access my book and you can listen to it or you can read it, check the references, and you can learn how it is that we do actually allow ourselves that free agency, that we do allow morality to triumph over monarchy, and that's via us taking on the responsibility that originally was ours and never was the government's, and cowboying up and making things happen. So I'm going to kind of turn my attention a little bit to the more recent events. If you haven't been following, obviously the GOP primary just ended, and we have a situation where the sitting governor, Spencer Cox, minutes after the polls had closed, stood up and declared victory over Phil Lyman. And first of all, that does seem, I mean, just in general, when you haven't had the certified results, I think it's a little weird that you come forward and you declare victory right away. People got upset with Donald Trump when he came out and declared victory at the debates and things like that. They didn't like that. They said, oh, he didn't win. And obviously there was no way for him to actually determine whether or not he had won. They weren't keeping points. They weren't doing anything. It was just a debate. In this case, they are tallying votes and they're doing those different things, but there had been many things that hadn't fully been certified and hadn't been fully submitted and all that sort of thing. And obviously people will vote all the way up to the last minute, and somehow Cox was confident enough to stand up and accept his congratulations prior to actually knowing the entirety of the results. Now, I think that in general that is kind of it is a political move in order to shore up the vote and to make people believe as though that you are 100% there. When we saw, when we saw in 2020 that they wouldn't call it for the longest time because, for a million reasons, and I could go down a massive rabbit hole in 2020. And if you do want to go down that rabbit hole about the 2020 election, I encourage you to go check out my other book. You can download, again, that for free at govmat.org, but it's Living the Fabled Tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. And I dive pretty deep into the 2020 election, but and provide the references. But definitively, we can't say that Trump won that, but there are a lot of weird anomalies that no one can explain and no one will address. But in addition to that, Cox coming forward and declaring victory right off the bat, that is, I think, kind of a show of bad faith, because you should wait until the results are certified before you decide to declare victory. Because have all the votes been counted? No. And they're basically they're basing that on a variety of factors. But the issue that I have is just the smell test. And I know this is anecdotal, but let me say it, and I'll follow it up with a little bit of some pretty challenging questions. So I live in a county that is pretty, it's I mean, all Utah's pretty red, but if you drive around town, all you see are Lyman signs. That's all you see. I counted 2 Cox signs in the entire area that I live, and then when you go throughout the rest of the county, it's pretty much the same. You're basically seeing mostly Lyman signs. And there's some of my signs. We don't want to discount the fact I'm running for governor too, don't you know? But there are, the majority of them are Lyman signs. And so when I looked at the voting map and I found that the results indicated that Cox had actually taken our county, I was blown away. I didn't believe it. There's just no way. There was nobody that was at least broadcasting that they were interested at all in voting for Cox. And I have a huge problem with that, because they did the same thing with Trump. They said rallies don't matter. People, putting these flags on their trucks and driving around, it doesn't matter. All these things, it doesn't matter. What matters is people showing up to the polls. And we found in 2016, when Trump basically blew through what was called the blue wall, all these states that Trump could never take, quote unquote, according to the media, he actually did take. And so the issue with this is that it doesn't pass the smell test, but in order for us to actually validate this and determine whether or not this was legitimate, we have to be able to review the data. We have to be able to review the numbers. And that information isn't being released. Not only is the information not being released regarding the vote itself, but regarding Cox's gathering of signatures. That information also is very shady. And this is the issue I have with the government in general, is that they are a public entity, and so all the information that passes through should be public. I mean, I know there's a few things here and there that have to remain private for a moment, but very quickly they should be made public. And this is not one of them. This is something that is 100% is public record and should be accessible, but they are making it very difficult to release this information, and they're not, I mean, there's the spirit of the law and there's the letter of the law, and the government lives in both. The problem is when things are a little more uncomfortable, they like to go really, really hard against the letter, even though it's still not justifiable. Because there are certain ways in which the information is supposed to be released, but they side heavily favorably toward the government. This sort of thing has to stop. Okay, maybe Cox did win my county, and if that is, that's okay. I'm fine with that. But the fact that they're not allowing access to the data and that they do not audit the results via a third party, that's a massive problem. This is one of the reasons of many that I'm running as a write-in candidate. Because if you have a system that's automated, that all you do is you slide a ticket through a machine and it counts your vote and then you move on to the next, there isn't a physical action by a competent teller to ensure that nothing fishy has gone on, right? Because a write-in vote has to be actually inputted. It has to be, then they put those to the side. It's a different process entirely. And so if you write in somebody and then you submit that vote, it ensures that you have a much better chance of, and not to mention the other solution to that is you have people write it in, so the government has to count it differently. And secondly, you have them take a picture of that ballot and upload it to an FTP site where that data is going to be stored securely, and we are already ready for an audit against what happens with the state. It's a totally separate system. And this is a very, very, very good way in which to approach it. And given the resources, if I'm able to get ample cash, I will set up an FTP site, and I will encourage voters to take a picture of the ballot after they've written in my name and upload it. And frankly, I don't really care if you vote for somebody else. If you vote for Governor Cox, if you vote for whoever, upload that to the FTP site, and then we have a ledger that is compared against what the government has, which is something that's never been done. And this is a common practice. Any of you that have been involved in accounting, what do you do at the end of every month? You reconcile the books. And if you're reconciling the books, you don't compare it to your own record, because that record could be flawed. You compare it to a separate record that is provided by the bank. That's why you receive your monthly statement. And so you compare what you have on your books against what the bank has on their books. You have basically another check and balance. And so after you've done that, you ensure that, hey, okay, it looks like everything's lining up, we're good to go, and you move on to the next month. That sort of thing doesn't happen with voting. And when voting is basically the only way by which most citizens are able to get who they need in there to voice their opinions, this is something that, and we don't have a system in place, and we have the Lieutenant Governor's office doing this, the person who's currently on the ballot. This is entirely and completely backwards. An accountant would gawk at this process if they were to review it themselves. And that's probably why Lyman, who is a CPA, is probably a little bit more agitated with this whole thing. And that's what I encourage you to do. Right now, until I have an FTP site all set up and ready to go, for now, if you are to vote for me, I encourage you to take a picture of it so that can be uploaded at a later date in the event that there does need to be an audit. But we do need to have another ledger in order to compare against the current. And this is so basic. It's any accountant that's ever done any amount of work on QuickBooks or anything else like that know that this is elementary, my dear Watson. Anyway, so I'm going to move on to a couple other things. There have been a handful of other things that have taken place, when it comes to kind of the political landscape that I could dive in pretty deep. One that I'd like to mention is John Curtis. John Curtis just won the primary, and he was recently a Democrat. And if you look at some of the more recent records, I had a clip, but it didn't explain everything entirely, so I want to do it here. But he was able to purchase some stock in Abbott Laboratories, which those of you that don't know the company, they do the Ensure. They do a lot of things, but of one of the things that they do the Ensure brand, where it's like a milk. It's kind of like a protein shake, sort of, but a lot of older folks drink it. Anyway, but Abbott Laboratories was granted access to some federal monies in order to develop a vaccine for the COVID, which didn't turn out to be a vaccine. But we again review my book. I actually discussed this in both books. Morality Over Monarchy and Living the Fabled Tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. I encourage you to listen to both of them. They're both audiobooks, and you can enjoy them that way. And I have all the references available. Anyway, Abbott Laboratories receives this grant, and John Curtis purchases stock the same day that they're to receive that grant. And obviously the stock with Abbott shoots to the roof, and he benefits from that. The investigative reporters went through this process to try and determine what happened, and there was an investigation opened up on John Curtis to determine this information, but unfortunately, there was no conclusion ever made. But this is a common practice. In my book, I discussed that in Utah law, there's actually a provision that allows public officials to glean 10% of any particular deal or whatever it may be. It's very loose. The law was created, I believe, in the 1980s, but it allows some level of benefit that goes to the public official in the event that they work out some sort of deal or they do X, Y, and Z. I'm not entirely sure where they're able to do this, but it does allow for that. And this is the same issue that takes place in Washington, where these people are able to insider trade legally. And that's why Nancy Pelosi, though she's only been making upwards of maybe $200,000 a year as Speaker of the House, she's worth about $100 million. And that's because she does very, very, very well in the stock market. And she has access to that information. There's actually she has an investing firm along with Mitch McConnell that allow them to really rake in the dough. And so it's all about the money, it seems, with many of these people. That if it is my view, and it's not my view, let's be clear about that. It's not my view. The moral stance on this is that if the regular citizen cannot insider trade, then you cannot insider trade. Okay? If you're a public official, you may not. Okay? And it was illegal from the beginning and should still remain illegal. And honestly, if you are going to be trading in stocks, it's almost impossible for you not to. And so if you are going not to insider trade is what I'm saying. So if that's going to be, if you want to go into office, the rule should be you can no longer trade in the market until you are out of public office. Okay? The restrictions should be put on the public official, not upon the private citizen. Anyways, so, and unfortunately, John Curtis was elected as to take Romney's seat, so appropriate. Romney himself is basically a Democrat. He's already said that if Trump wins, he'll move over to the Democratic Party, like anyone's pulling his teeth to do that. If you look at the liberal policies that have been passed by both of these and been promoted by both of these gentlemen, you would know that they do not represent conservative values, even though they may have the same religion. And that shouldn't be the basis upon which you vote for somebody, certainly. Because we all make mistakes and we all have issues, though we should allow people the space to make those mistakes, we also need to make sure that we're standing up for our own rights and our own God-given opportunities that God gives to us. I mean, that's why the entire Bill of Rights, 1 to 10, were established, is because those were given to us by God. Our ability to do these things was given to us by God, and it wasn't something that has been provided to us by the government. The problem is that has been distorted in recent years by many to make you believe that the government affords us these rights. No, the government is supposed to protect those rights. They are not afforded to us by the government. Unfortunately, they are continually abused, and we continue to see those things drift from our grasp. So again, this is one of my main points. This is my first priority in my book, and I encourage you to, again, to go listen to it. It is a good read, if I say so myself. But I'm going to move on to this next portion here that I've got. Basically, there have been some serious issues that continue to take place with the Utah public education system. I've discussed this in length in previous episodes, and I just want to kind of pull a little quote here from the book. It says, morality has been neglected and grossly manipulated through the years. In the state of Utah, we need to change this. So we need to realize that morality is worth fighting for and to work to uphold it. When you look at the issues that continue to take place, and if you just look over the course of the last year, first of all, I do provide a graph in there that shows that only 50% of our students on average are proficient in any of the given subjects. Some of them less, some of them a little bit more. It just depends on what subject it is. And in terms of data, I mentioned this, they don't track everything accurately, and they've adjusted the way they track them. And it is a really terrible data set to pull from because it's not very good. Now, this doesn't reflect upon the teachers themselves. There are good teachers, there are bad teachers. But what it does reflect on is the fact that many of these kids half of these kids are not responding to this lecture style of teaching. And we have to make massive changes there in order to ensure that the kids are the main focus. And this is the issue, is that because the government has taken over and that this has become basically a political cudgel to force people to do X, Y, and Z, is regarding the employment of teachers in the state. It prevents the focus on the kids on doing what needs to be done there, rather than basically functioning as a union to take care of its workers. Schooling is not for the teachers. Okay? Now, the teachers benefit from this symbiotically because they have kids and pupils to teach, right? but it isn't for the teachers. It is for the kids. And that's why when I talk about it, we need to make, in the book, you have to go through a process by which we're going to remove much of the structure that currently exists, because it's the state, primarily the federal government, who establishes the standards by which public education is supposed to function. And the reason the federal government establishes these different modus operandi is because they are the ones that provide the money. We cannot be sucking at the federal teat for any longer. If Utah wants to be a bastion of freedom, they have to be willing to take on the responsibility, and they have to break away from the funding of federal officials. This doesn't mean we break away from the union. This doesn't mean that we become a country in the center of the United States. No, we still remain Utah. We still remain a member of the union. I'm not saying anything like that. So don't try and change or manipulate what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if we are going to function the way that we should, as the 10th Amendment allows, which says the 10th Amendment says the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people. And so it is up to us to determine many of these little things. But because we continue to accept federal funding from the federal government, we have to abide by their rules if we want to continue to receive it. And so the only way we do this is if we cut off that funding. And if we cut off that funding, we have to find different ways in which we're going to be able to instruct our kids. And largely that's going to be a little bit different. But I'm going to leave that as a little bit of a hook to get you to go over to the website and to listen to it. There is also a link there to Rumble where you can listen to it. But there are many, many, many good things that can happen if we are willing to take on the responsibility. If we aren't, then don't be upset when bad things come to you because of the government. Okay? Now, if we move along here into some of the economic news that I've seen that's come through, and you see that Utah continues to get praise because of its condition in the United States. Now, that's by comparison. Okay, let's be very clear about that. By comparison, Utah is doing very, very well. Especially when you compare it to rough states like New Mexico, unfortunately, our neighbors. All right, kid-according neighbors. I don't know. We only touching corners, if that's touching at all. But anyway, they struggle a lot, and there are a lot of other states that struggle a lot, but Utah has done very well. And let me be very clear. This isn't because of policy that has been introduced by the Utah government. This is primarily because of the individuals themselves and the type of people that live here and basically the religious view that exists here. Okay, so if you have people that are God-fearing, that attend church regularly, that understand that it's by the sweat of my brow that I'm going to receive my bread, and all these different things, if they understand these concepts, their ability, this is those of you that know Joseph Smith, but most of you should if you live in Utah. If you don't, look him up. He's a great guy. Flawed like all of us, but a great guy. He said that we need to, in order for, when speaking, I think to a reporter, I can't remember exactly, but they said, how are you able to govern everybody in your society here? How are you able to govern everybody? He said, if you teach them correct principles, and they will govern themselves. And that's what's happened in the state of Utah, is that correct principles have been taught. Not from the governor, not from public officials, for crying out loud, not even close to that. None of them should be taking credit for that. None of them should be getting a pat on the back for that. None of them. But they do. They take it, of course. They receive it. And I don't know if they necessarily speak particularly to the people, but it is a force that was created by God, and He is the one that ensures that Utah is doing as well as it is because of the people that live by those moral principles. Now, the issue is that they do take credit for it, and it is viewed as though that we're doing very, very well, and then that is then reflected upon the current governor and what has been happening. The issue is something I shared a little while ago, but in Visual Capitalist, you'll see that the state of Utah is one of the top taxers in the union, which is pretty mind-blowing if you ask me. So, in fact, I'm going to pull this up really fast. I didn't have it pulled up, but I'm going to pull it up because I want to show you what I'm capitalist. Here we are. And let's see. U.S. taxes. Here we are. So this is visualizing the tax burden in every U.S. state. And I talked about, like I said, I talked about this a little while ago. But when you look at the list, you can kind of guess basically who is going to be in the top. Okay, it's almost a given. It's really hard to not be able to do that. You'll see the very, very top, you have a 12% tax burden in New York. Okay, and then you have Hawaii with 11.8% tax burden. And again, all these are blue states. You have Vermont, you have Maine, you have California, you have Connecticut, you have Minnesota, you have Illinois, you have New Jersey, you have Rhode Island, all of which are blue states, if I'm not mistaken. There might be a handful of them. Maybe I said it earlier, but you know what I mean. Are blue states. People that have very, very liberal policies and all that sort of thing. And that's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are the top 10 are blue states. Guess who's number 11? Utah. Utah is number 11 at 9.4%. This is basically what it says is it's the percentage of an average person's income that is paid toward state and local taxes. It considers property tax, income tax, sales, and excise tax. So basically it's saying all these taxes that are generated in the state of Utah, we are number 11 as the highest taxers in the entire union, when in reality we should be number 50. If you want to get real. Okay, and so this is one of the problems that we have, is that we have high taxation in the state of Utah, number 11 in terms of taxation, and yet we've had high amounts of growth because of, perhaps lower regulations in certain areas and all that sort of thing, and then also people that are just trying to get into a less crime-ridden area. Again, this is all based upon the people and their ability to be good people. But it's not based upon what the government has done. And so the governor's getting a bunch of credit for this, when in reality he shouldn't, and he should be turning that away entirely. In fact, one of the things that I say in my book is that we should be government officials should be constantly pushing away accolades, because they themselves are not the cause of those things. It is the people that are doing it. Okay. Now, I just wanted to wrap things up here toward the end, and I encourage you to, take a minute and follow, like, comment. That helps the algorithm. It helps other people share it. We need as much help as we can get. Those that are going to stand for morality. And I just wanted to give a quick spiritual thought here in those of you that aren't familiar with the Book of Mormon. It's a great book. I encourage you to read it. Everyone should read it. But there's a story of a man in it. His name is Abinadi. And he is he's basically commissioned by God to go and tell this man named King Noah that he needs to stop doing what he's doing, because he's destroying his people. And so he goes in there and he tells them all these different things, and they try and kill him. And he is able to withstand their blows. He's like, I haven't finished my message here. And so he does that, and eventually he's able to deliver his message entirely. And as they eventually capture him, and they strap him to a stake, and they burn him. So not a very great ending for someone who was doing what God asked him to do, right? Pretty rough. And so he did exactly what he was supposed to do. And as he's going away, I can only imagine that maybe he had a flicker that said, I hope I made the difference I was supposed to. Because he didn't see anybody change their ways. At least it doesn't say anywhere in the record that anyone changed their ways while he was alive. He just did what he was supposed to in hopes that the right thing would prevail. And thankfully he did. He didn't know this. Of course, he didn't know this. But he did. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. And he reached the person that he was supposed to reach. And he did exactly what he was supposed to do. by delivering his message. He reached a man named Alma, who was a high priest in that king's court, and he was able to reconstruct and change the problems that were taking place in the kingdom at that time. And that I wanted to share that because that's how I feel a little bit about this entire pursuit. I feel like it's an Abinadi moment where I'm probably, I don't know, but in order for me to actually get the momentum that's needed, I need some help, and I need a good amount of help. But if I'm able to reach that one person that's going to make that difference, then I'm okay with it. I don't want to be burned at the stake. I want to be entirely clear about that. I have no interest in being burned at the stake. But yes, I'm doing this because I feel I must do it. And I encourage you that if you are moved by this, if you are moved for the need of morality, that you take a stand, that you do what you must do, that you stop sitting on the sidelines and stop being nervous to intervene, and take up the courage and act. And I'm grateful that you took the time to listen again. Please take a look at govmat.org. Download the proposal. Again, all free, and pass it along. And let's get something moving here. Thank you.